All right, we've all reached the part you want to be at, and that's our last objective. Yay! And so we have objective 12, and this is now going to take us Clinton through the contemporary world. And so, um, kind of a ongoing thing, I guess, in contemporary world is a lot of people seem to be a little bit more pessimistic and see the box as being empty and not half full. But rather than looking inward of how can I get this, we're looking for someone else to fill it, much like the kitty cat here. Box empty, this is insufficient. Anyway, here we go. So objective 12.1, we have the presidencies of Clinton and W. Bush. So right here, we didn't really have a title, but when Hillary Clinton ran for president in 2016, what are we going to call Bill Clinton? And so you have the first gentleman instead of the first lady. Um, I don't know. So, Bill Clinton political, what does he do? His focus is called the bridge to the 21st century. He introduces a new thing because he notices Democrats and Republicans are kind of mixed. And so he's part of a new group we call the New Democrats. They're liberal, but they're willing to bend on some conservative issues such as trade agreements and traditional families. The whole idea is to get the Republican Congress to vote for them. Okay? The Republican response, they come back with a contract with America. These are conservative laws to return America to a traditional country, and many of these have actually been passed. Some of them deal with gang cleanup on streets, other ones deal with educational opportunities, others dealing with paying, what is that stuff? Child support, etc. And there's many, many things. Now, we have the discussion of impeachment here in Bill Clinton. Impeachment is when you're going to start the process to remove someone from office. There have only been two presidents have been brought up on impeachment, and that is Andrew Johnson, and here in the cartoon, and Bill Clinton. Richard Nixon was discussed and probably would have been voted out, but he left instead. Now, the subject of Bill Clinton's impeachment was about Monica Lewinsky, and it wasn't the fact that he had an extramarital or a side chick, I guess you could say, with Monica Lewinsky. It's the fact that he perjured himself or lied about the relationship in court. And so perjury is a very serious thing. That's why I was taking on the stand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And so you have that going on. Now, also here at this time, we have the idea of property rights becoming a major issue. All right? So, the Fourth Amendment to our Constitution prevents unlawful searches and seizures, and the Fifth Amendment sets up the concept of eminent domain, which we covered, but they basically can't take any property from you that is private and used for public without good reason. We have two issues happen here. The first is Ruby Ridge in the 90s. This is in Idaho. A man stopped paying his taxes and his land was threatened. The FBI came on there to basically seize the land. He'd been, stockpiling weapons with his family. It resulted in the shooting of his son. And now, famously, there's a big issue that's going to happen there. Probably the bigger one, though, would be the Branch Davidians, and this is the picture on the right here. The Branch Davidians are a religious sect of Seventh-day Adventists, and I'm sure I'll show you this video in class here. But there are numerous accounts of underage brides and child abuse and stockpiling of weapons, and so the Fourth Amendment comes into play here. The FBI will raid the compound of a cult because of guns and child abuse, and this is used to show government misuse. Now, I mentioned these two things here because later on they're going to be the catalyst for one of the worst homegrown acts of terror in the United States in 1995. Now, what is eminent domain, okay? Eminent domain is that, again, government cannot take private property for public use without properly compensating you. Now, two issues here. The first one is Kelo versus New London. Miss Kelo lived in a house. New London wanted to build an interstate ramp running through basically her living room. We now have a new thing added into eminent domain, and that is if the courts can prove that it is for the public good to use whatever you have, you must sell and to their price. And so right there, if the public good can be proven in a better demand than the private property, you must sell. Now in 2014, again, eminent domain's brought in, but this is with the Bundy Ranch. And he had used this land for years, and that his family was using to graze the cattle. He refused to pay taxes and brought this in public view. He had a standoff, again, armed standoff, and went to jail for a few years. He recently got out, oh gosh, maybe 2 years ago. But there's eminent domain. Now we come to domestic terrorism. And so, as I said, 1995, the man with Timothy McVeigh, and he had a counterpart, mainly Timothy McVeigh, in retaliation for what he perceived as government abuse at Ruby Ridge in Waco, he's going to bomb a federal building. Now, the federal building, the Murrah building, had a child care center attached to it in Oklahoma City, and he basically, as you can see in the picture here, blew the entire front of the building clean off. And so this is going to change the name for lots of other things. Also in the 90s, we become aware after they catch him, because he'd been on the loose almost 20 years, Ted Kaczynski, he was known as the Unabomber, sent anonymous bombs to people just for like 20 years, and I think only 3 of them actually killed people, but nonetheless, it's a pretty scary thing. And then also we have the kind of the modern school shooting of Columbine in 1999, where things are now looked inward. Okay, this person's doing this, but why? And with this domestic terrorism, we kind of have romanticized this in a way and focused on the killers and the masterminds as opposed to other things. Now, Clinton Foreign, what is going on with Clinton Foreign? There's a big deal with piracy in 1993 in Somalia, which is down in Africa. He's going to try to do that. There's an issue of genocide, first in Rwanda in 1994 and later in Bosnia in 1995. Now, in 1995, NATO, with America at the lead, will participate in the humanitarian war against Serbia. And then also we're now dealing with a new group called Al-Qaeda. We know about them in the 90s, led by a man named Osama bin Laden. In 1983, they're going to attack the World Trade Center the first time. In 1998, they're going to go after African embassies in Tanzania and in Kenya. And in 2000, they're going to bomb the USS Cole off the coast of Yemen. All of this is happening before 9/11. Now, the election of 2000. So in 2000, we have George W. Bush running against Al Gore. Now, Al Gore wins the popular vote, but Bush wins the electoral. And before you start screaming foul, this has happened 5 times: 1824, 1876, 1888, 2000, and 2016. Not 20. What did I do with the numbers there? Good grief. But that should be 2016. You get that. So this is nothing new that's happened. There's some confusion in Florida. There are things called hanging chads, which if you look down here in the yellow strip, if you vote for that person, the little piece of paper behind that falls. It's called a chad. Stays on. It's called a hanging chad. And then the recounts versus machine. Now, Gore is not willing to concede this. He wants a hand recount, and Bush will actually sue Gore in a Supreme Court case. It's very close because there's 9 justices, and so it's 5-4, and the hand recount's not feasible. Bush is declared the winner. And so now we have this idea. Now, W. Bush domestic. George W. is going to focus on education. We get the idea, No Child Left Behind. The IDEA Act, standardized tests, IEPs, least restrictive environment, several things. The next is the responses to the Hurricane Katrina and FEMA. Hurricane Katrina happens in 2005, and it basically wrecks New Orleans. Now, if you look here on the right, this was what they called the Six Flags New Orleans. Sometimes they called it Jazzland. It's basically flooded, and now it's an abandoned amusement park because Six Flags just kind of cut their losses and said, we can't make it work. W. Bush is going to bring back into play the faith-based initiatives, which are religious-backed social services. The Columbia disaster will happen, which is when the Columbia Space Shuttle basically exploded, and we now have school shootings moving on to college campuses with Virginia Tech, which is a horrible one as well. Now, Objective 12.2, we have global trade agreements and global terrorism. So trade agreements first. In the 60s, we have something called the GATT, which is General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades. This is during the Kennedy era, and it's going to give rise to the World Trade Organization. We have 2 organizations called G8 and G20, a meeting of top global powers to discuss major issues such as trade. People who do not respond or do things incorrectly can receive sanctions on the part of the UN or World Trade or NATO, and this is usually done to most notably Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. We do have the World Trade Organization with the World Trade Centers, and we also have the International or Universal Monetary Fund. The idea of this is to help any country from just basically falling apart. Now, for global terrorism, at 9/11 on September 11th, 2001, 4 planes are hijacked and they're used as weapons against the United States. Bush will declare a war on terrorism. Domestic, the big thing that happened is we will have the Patriot Act, which is an acronym. I think it's providing appropriate uh, training and response uh, to terror. I'll look it up for you. We also have the Department of Homeland Security created. Now, foreign, we will invade Afghanistan to find the Taliban to get to bin Laden. I know that's a lot, but there it is. We will also invade Iraq, as known as Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Bush will go after what he calls the axis of evil, which is Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. The big thing there is we're looking for weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs, right? Now, global terrorism. Terrorism is now kind of a new thing, and it tends to breed in countries that are very, very poor. So here are some ideas. We have the cell concept. This is stuff like Al Qaeda. The cells are just basically little branches of this all around the world, and they are to commit jihad, or holy war, against the West. We have the Al-Nusra. The Al-Nusra is jihad against Syria. All right, we have Boko Haram. Boko Haram is jihad in Africa. Famously, they're known for kidnapping girls and making them underage brides, and some of these girls that are kidnapped and married off are as young as 8. We have ISIS. ISIS is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Pretty clear what they want. They want their own government. They want to return to the way things were before World War I happened and we split up all these countries. Now, to make these a little bit more difficult, we have the idea of lone wolf attacks. These are radicalized people from the internet. It gets a lot of attention, and it's just something very, very easy, and a lot of these things happen. We had this with the Charlie Hebdo thing in France. We had this with the Orlando shooting. We had this with, several other things. I think there was one in Santa Barbara, and generally we have one of these things happen. They're captured, and we have one of these cell groups go on and say, yes, they were acting on my behalf, etc. We also have Hezbollah. Hezbollah is jihad in Lebanon. They do not like Israel, and they have a ton of support in Iran. Lastly, we have the Hamas. Now, the Hamas are Islamic fundamentalists in Palestine. They run the Gaza Strip, and they are the ones that consistently fight with Israel back and forth, and it's over the whole idea of who runs the Gaza Strip or Jerusalem. Now, Objective 12.3 are the Obama and the Trump administrations. So the Obama domestic, there is the election of 2008. His main thing he focused on was health care by way of a executive order, the Affordable Health Care Act. Is passed. Slangly, we call it Obamacare. He will do online fireside chats. We do have the Deepwater Horizon, the oil spill, which I mentioned. There it is right there in the Gulf of Mexico. We have the Dodd-Frank Act, which is regulating more power to break up large companies to protect consumers. He's the first president to bring up the idea of LGBT protection. And we do have Sandy Hook, which is probably the most, I would call, vile school shooting, because they went after kindergartners and little kids, or this one guy did anyway. So now for Obama foreign, he will push for Russian sanctions. Russia will invade the Ukraine in a crazy incident. He does receive a Nobel Peace Prize for his international relations. Towards the end, he calls, I don't know what else to call it. I call it the I'm sorry trip. He will go to Japan, the Philippines, Iran, and Cuba to kind of correct mistakes America has made in the past. Famously, he's right here, and we'll discuss this significance of this picture, but he was forced to stand in front of a mural of Che Guevara. Who is Che Guevara, etc. He will end the war in Afghanistan towards the middle of the second term. And we begin the civil war in Syria, which we're still kind of involved with today. Trump is elected in 2016. We have the slogan of Make America Great Again. This is very similar to Return to Normalcy or the idea of the evil empire with Reagan, etc. We do have the idea of disaster relief efforts. The immigration, the wall, and the policy has been a major talking point of this. He is going to take a conservative stance on LGBT, police brutality, and abortion. He said that states will have more say and they can basically figure this out. And there has been some weakened ties with a Arabic friend of the country of Saudi Arabia. And so that's what we're looking at right now. Now, last objective. Yay, all right. 12.4, well, this is global climate, immigration, debt, and technological trends. So first off, global climate. In 1996, they'll ban CFCs, which are chlorofluorocarbons. They ate a hole in the ozone layer. 1992, they'll sign the Kyoto Protocol. This was a global pact to reduce greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gas is a gas that contributes to the greenhouse effect or warming of the earth, or what we call now global warming. In 2006, Al Gore is going to produce a movie called An Inconvenient Truth to inform the public about global warming and climate change. And it's a very impactful movie. Now, immigration. So, 1996, we have the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act. This is border enforcement and social programs. Since 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security handles most custom things with immigration and customs enforcement, also known as ICE, and they will use deportations. That's the subject of my little picture there. If you've seen Zootopia, Mr. Big likes to ICE people. That's all I had for you. I don't know. It's a stretch. Now, some proposed things what they did call for was the DREAM Act. The DREAM never passed, but it would be development, relief, and education for alien minors. It's introduced in 2001, never passed. DACA does, however, it's ruled unconstitutional in 2018, and this is deferred action for childhood arrivals. It's passed in 2012. 2018 is made unconstitutional. Now, our national debt, all right? Crazy stuff here, and you can see how it's rising. First off, we have to understand what a gross domestic product is, and it's what a country produces in a year. Our debt to GDP ratio is where we have a problem. How much money do we owe and how much are we producing? W. Bush will use tax cuts in the similar sense of what Reagan did. However, that does not work. Obama will bring in Keynesian economics like FDR. That does not work, and we have recessions and etc. In 2011, there is a fiscal year. A very, very high thing, and the government tried something we hadn't done before, and that was to argue. The argument got so bad that they actually shut down the government, and they've done this again since. When they come back, there's the Budget Control Act to raise the debt ceiling to try to prevent another government shutdown, although we know it will. Now, the American Taxpayer Relief Act in 2003 is to avoid the fiscal cliff, and the current debt as of June 2019 is over $22 trillion. If you're going to freak yourself out, you go look at the U.S. debt clock. There's all kinds of things. We'll look at it in class, but scary stuff. Now, technological trends. I believe this is our last one, our next to last one. 1946, we have the first computer. This is it on the right. The whole thing is the computer. It was called the ENIAC. It took a whole room. 1971, we have the idea of Silicon Valley in California. This is a place where a lot of technological components are built still to even today. 1980, we have the first PC. It's called the MITS. In 1983, the internet is created. It was actually used for the military. In 1990, the World Wide Web, or another name for the internet, is created where people could use it. And in 1990, we have the new it craze of the dot-com companies. The bubble crashed, and they're all gone with the exception of eBay, Amazon, and Yahoo. Now, social media has become the new thing in 2003, or starting with 2003. So the first social media site is MySpace. 2003. For Facebook is developed for college students in 2004. The first iPhone is developed in 2007, and the first Galaxy developed phone is in 2009. That's it.